Test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, let's. All right, the NBA season is going to be here sooner than you realize, and we have the dates for Pelicans training camp. I'll give you the latest in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll talk your questions as well. The TV deal, starting lineup, Brandon Ingram trades, all of it in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on a Thursday night. It's 8 p.m. Central. We're doing a live show. This is going to be a little bit different than the normal live shows that I do, where we just kind of run through the regular episode of Locked On Pelicans, and then I just get to your questions. I got a couple of things I want to talk about in the first segment here, but then look, we'll take your questions for the chat, whatever you've got. I got things I can talk about too. We'll go for about 30, 45 minutes or so. And that'll be that. So put your questions in the chat here on YouTube, and we'll get to pretty much everything, I think. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down and the sports stop sporting like we want them to, this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So the big news, at least to me, because it impacts my schedule, it's going to impact all y'all as well, is the Pelicans announced their training camp schedule and information. And it's worth noting that training camp is not going to be in New Orleans. And I actually like this, and I'll explain why. They're going to hold training camp at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee from October 1st through Sunday, October 6th. They're doing this because the Pelicans training facility, the Ochsner Sports Performance Center, is completing the final phase of renovations. You know, we've heard a lot, is this organization cheap? Are they, skimping out on things? Their training facility is relatively new. It's under 10 years old, I believe. And it cost them a lot of money when they first built it. They renovated it a little bit when David Griffin came in. And now they're going through an even bigger renovation right now. They've sunk a lot of money into this facility. This all told is somewhere going to be between 30 to $50 million when they finish up this renovation. That's not cheap. That's from when they built it in the first place and the multiple renovations that it's gone through. It's pretty good. I'm happy that they're doing that and, bumping up the level of facilities. The training facility, more so than the arena and other places, is what matters to players, because that's where they spend the majority of their time. That's where they're working at. That's where they're going through practices and all of those things. It's like recruiting when you're, a college football player. It's about your locker rooms and other things, not so much the, stadium that you play in, though that matters too. So the fact that they're renovating the facility is great. The fact that they're just getting out of town, I think, can be good too. When you have these kind of little mini retreat off seasons, that's great. These guys are all going to be there together. We've seen in years past, sometimes they get together for workouts, sometimes they don't. But here, they're not able to go home. They're spending more time together. There will be dinners every single night, those sorts of things. That can bring a group together and build some chemistry. So I like that they are getting out of town and going to do all of that here. So by the way, this is a live show. I see Bronze Sneakers asking, so put your questions in the chat here and they will get answered on this show. We'll go for, I got to stop around 9 p.m. Central, but we'll go as long as we can, as long as we need to with all of this. So overall, I'm pretty happy that they are getting out of town, going to go to Belmont for, basically a week before coming back and then having their game October 7th in the Smoothie King Center. It's a weird tip-off. 12:30 p.m. Central Time, so the middle of the day, is the time for their first preseason game. I have no idea why that is the case. There might be something else. We'll see. But that's that one. And basketball is going to be here before we know it. That's basically 2 months away from today is the first preseason game. So that's pretty exciting. Basketball is around the corner. We've made it. We'll be 3 days a week here on Locked On Pelicans for a little bit longer, but then we'll be, of course, 5 days a week as we ramp up towards training camp here with everything. So that's kind of the big news on that. The other kind of big news this week was Lauri Markkanen signing the extension with the Utah Jazz, kind of signifying that they're not trading him. And the question for them now is, okay, they've locked him up. Are they going to try and pivot and be a contender right away? Or are they going to maybe tank and not be good for another year? I lean more towards them not being interested in contending and tanking for one more year because this draft is stacked, getting another player, and then trying to become a contender around Lauri Markkanen. That, in theory, kind of rules out Brandon Ingram as a trade target for the Utah Jazz. I don't know how interested they would be in him anyway. If they were to trade for him, sign him to a big extension, they have a lot of picks, and I think that would hurt some of their flexibility that they could have in the future, like seasons from now, to make moves. And I don't know if that's what Danny Ainge and that team wants to do. So that's kind of worth keeping in mind when we look at the Brandon Ingram trade market. And we'll talk more about that here. I see Nola Star Bar ask, will BI get a new contract before the season starts? We'll get into that in the next segment here. But I still don't really see him being traded to Jazz. Could change, certainly, but I think it's one of those things where we're looking like it's going to be Brandon Ingram, on this team next season. So what is the starting lineup? I see a couple of y'all putting, in the starting lineups you think. Put in the 5 guys you think starts. Is it a small ball lineup with Zion at center? Is there another center that they would be starting? Then who comes off of the bench? Who do you want coming off the bench? Who do you think should come off the bench? Let's break all of that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, a live episode of Locked On Pelicans where we are taking your questions. Today's live episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. And even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it with just life being busy. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Look, therapy is not just for people who've experienced major trauma. It's for folks who are just learning to be the best version of themselves, develop positive coping skills, learn how to set boundaries. That's what therapy can be used for, just empowering you to be the best version of yourself. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You don't have time to drive to a doctor's office? That's okay. You just hop on your phone, your tablet, your computer, and you have your session. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the Number One Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans as well on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube page where we do the live shows and things like that. I'm excited for the season to start here. So there's a question in the chat that's really good here. Do you think Steve Kerr likes BI's game? No, he does not, right? One of the things we've heard is that the Golden State Warriors were really going after or wanted to go after Lauri Markkanen. I wouldn't say they were really, truly going after him, right? Would they, now that he's signed an extension, can't be traded, would they pivot to Brandon Ingram? And it doesn't sound like they're going to do that at all. You had Ingram play for Steve Kerr in the FIBA World Cup last year, and it didn't go well. He eventually dropped Ingram from the starting lineup. That was also kind of one of those things where he was sick. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was just cover. Steve Kerr took some not so subtle shots at Ingram, in the media, talking about how he wasn't as physical or tough as he wanted. And I just can't imagine that the Warriors are going to go after Ingram, even if they should. Like, they need more scoring on that team. It just doesn't sound like from Steve Kerr that they're going to. And the other thing is there going to be an offer that makes sense that New Orleans would even want to accept? It doesn't sound like that the Warriors were even putting Jonathan Kuminga in a trade for Lauri Markkanen. It was all centered around Moses Moody, and that's fine, but Moody isn't particularly great of a player. Kuminga, I think, has a higher ceiling. If you can't get Kuminga, and it certainly sounds like they're not including Brandon Podziemski in there, I don't think you're going to really be able to find a deal that gets done, but I do think the Warriors should go after a player of Brandon Ingram's caliber. Like, they need that for Steph Curry and trying to kind of expand what it might be, just what am I trying to say? Trying to not expand, but like lengthen the runway, the window that they have around Steph Curry, because that I do think is kind of, that window is closing here pretty quickly. So let's get into some of the chat questions here. Doug Rosenthal says, be honest, Jake, how long did you know the Pels were engaging with and eventually going to pick Gray Sports for television rights? We had heard some things, and it's something I talked a lot about, and some of it makes sense. And I did the whole show on this yesterday, and it was Christian Clark of NOLA.com who broke the news with that it makes sense for what they're doing because Bally Sports didn't work, and they're going to have a pretty similar thing here, but I still have big time questions about, will it totally work? A lot of the games are going to be on Bounce TV. I don't think that's ideal. It's a solution. Is it a great solution? I'm not sure, but it's maybe better than what it was before, and it gives it available to people. So that's a good thing. The quality of those games on Bounce TV weren't great. There's some other questions when it comes to things like that. Overall, I think it's fine. I don't know if it's like this paradigm shift, but it's going to make it easier to watch games. So I think that at least is going to be a good thing here. Dundee says, is Brandon Ingram going to change his shot profile so he can actually fit in better with this group? Or is that ship sailed? I don't think it's sailed. I wouldn't say it's likely that he's going to do that, but when you listen to him talk at the end of season media availability after that playoff series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, he definitely sounded like a guy who is being introspective about himself. And this summer is definitely going to be a sobering experience for him, right? No team's interested in trading for him, not because he's a bad player, because he's not. I think some of the hate towards him has gotten a little bit out of control. It's not that he's a bad player. It's just he's not worth the money that he wants or thinks he's worth. And when you can't find one person willing to do that, that I think is kind of a shocking moment where you need to look yourself in the mirror and go, wait, what's going on here? And what can I do? What needs to change to be able to kind of get that contract and that money that I want? And that's something that I'm sure he's doing. I'm sure that's something that his representation is talking about as well with him. And so this is a summer that I think can be a catalyst for change for Brandon Ingram. He knows he needs to shoot more threes. They're going to make that very clear. They also kind of addressed his big criticism or excuse, we can even say, when it came to that, saying, hey, I need a point guard. They got one in Dejounte Murray, right? You have the point guard that he had been asking for. Now, it's not quite the same as Lonzo Ball, but, Murray is the same level of point guard, I think, as Jrue Holiday. Defense is different. Other things are different, but, there's similar type of players in how they can help their teammates elevate the team and all of that. So you've eliminated the excuses. If it doesn't happen this year, it's never going to happen. But I think he realizes, I think he knows, right? The narrative around him this summer has not been positive. They pay attention to that, or at least people in their camp, around the players pay attention to that. And that gets back to them. So I definitely think that it's something that is, optimistic that he can change. So that I do think can be a good thing. I think he can shoot more threes. I'll take 6 threes per game. If he can do that, I think that's a really great option for New Orleans here. And I think you'll probably see him do something like that. Ben Crabtree says, David Griffin legit created more questions for this team this offseason than solutions. There's still questions. They had 2 big concerns going into this offseason, right? And that was point guard and center. They were going to lose Jonas Valanciunas. They were never going to bring him back. Even on, the same, even if they offered him slightly more money than Washington offered him, that was never going to happen. They had to answer 2 questions, center and point guard. They addressed the point guard spot, right? There's still a question about center, but I don't know if it's more questions than solutions here. This team is very, very talented. There's a lot of guys that are going to get minutes that are good players here. And I think that's good, right? I see it from Hollygrove Steve here, where he says Dejounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, Jordan Hawkins. I'm not going to go into Matt Ryan, but I'll say Jose Alvarado. Those guys need minutes. That's like 8, 9, 10 people that have quality minutes that you could add to this. And that's not counting, you have Daniel Tice, who's played well, even though Germany just lost. Carlo Makovic looks like he could be good. We'll wait and see on Yves Missi, but there's potential there. This is still a really talented team, I think, and they can win some games. Do they need to upgrade the center spot? Yes. When you look at them in terms of starting center in the Western Conference, is it arguably the worst? I think so. But it doesn't mean that you can't win games. When you look at some teams that have done well in the playoffs, there isn't like elite center play necessarily there. Sometimes there is, but not always. So if New Orleans can just get a little bit from Tice, a little bit from Carlo Makovic, and maybe one other guy, or just play Zion at the 5, which I don't think is the exact way to go right now, I do think that this team can kind of be okay with everything. And that's encouraging here, I think, right? Like there's a lot of talent here. So I don't think that there are more questions than answers or solutions or anything like that. I think you address one of the biggest things. And when you look at Dejounte Murray and what he can bring to the team, one, I think he'll be good defensively. So you have another elite, not maybe elite, but good point of attack defender. But now you can just run pick and rolls because you have a guard that can do it. With Zion, with Ingram, with Trey, with some of the other guys. They haven't had that. Right? That's not what CJ's forte is. And when you looked at Carlo Makovic in the pick and roll in Summer League, that encourages me, I think. So I think you can address a lot of what was bothering this team, at least offensively, with Murray, because it wasn't really that they're bad offensively because the center position's not good. So I do think that they are not in the worst position. I think it's also really tough to just win games in the Western Conference, right? And if they don't end up having the season we want, it's probably just because the West is good. Like West is good this year. If the Golden State Warriors, if the Utah Jazz start trying to compete, right? Like what team isn't trying to be competitive in the West next year? The Spurs are going to be better. They won't be great. Portland's probably not trying to be competitive. But everybody is. Memphis, Denver, Dallas, Minnesota, New Orleans, Golden State, OKC, the Lakers, the Clippers, Phoenix, right? All of those teams are trying to be competitive. Portland isn't. Sacramento is. The Spurs maybe. Utah maybe. Maybe 3 teams, like 1.5 if we want to split the difference. That's the group that's not trying to win games. That is a competitive conference. It's going to be hard to win games. Maybe the center position holds them back. I don't rule that out, but I think it'll just be other things, and it won't be like, oh, the 5 spot is what totally killed this team. It'll be other stuff too. Okay, coming up next, let's take more of your questions here in the live episode of Locked On Pelicans, and then we'll just kind of keep going till we run out of time. I got to go do another podcast with someone else after this. So let's answer more of your questions, interact with the chat more here, coming up next in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But there's no NBA playoffs right now. We've got fewer games, so the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel is going to let you and me keep the sports going whenever we want. And all we have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that we're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Still got the Olympics going on, the gold medal match with Team USA coming back to beat Serbia, taking on France. The home team, they've had some really home court advantage with the refs. Maybe you want to go with Team France because of that, right? It's Major League Baseball is going on. You got to bet on who's going to hit on a home run. You can do it. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sports betting partner of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the Number One Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, it's rotating to hosts on Locked On NBA. There's a different group of hosts every single day. I host the Wednesday one with John Corrales of Locked On Celtics. It's really cool. Like big market, small market. We kind of bring that perspective to the show. Getting New Orleans on the national show a lot, I think, is a really, really cool thing. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On NBA and make them your second listen today. So let's keep talking to y'all. This is your time to shine here on a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. And let's get into more of your questions here. I'm just going to kind of run through the chat. Neo says, will BI buy into the team being led by Zion? That's kind of the big thing, right? Like that's kind of the big thing. I think he's capable of changing his play style and trying to fit in more with the team, but will he actually? Remains to be seen. He was really excited to have the ball in his hands last summer and then just didn't do what they really wanted him to do. Like that's been well reported that they kind of abandoned the offense because he didn't do what it was, and they kind of abandoned the James Borrego offense, and Borrego's back with the team. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind. That's going to maybe make or break the Pelicans more so than the center spot, right? Like if Ingram doesn't buy in, and I don't want to say go rogue because that's not it, but if he's not doing what they need him to do, you're going to lose games. It's as simple as that. It's got to be a Zion-led team. Ingram right now is looking at the third option, potentially fourth option, right? Zion, Murray, then Ingram. Is it Trey? Is it CJ? These are open questions that I don't think are set yet, and that's something that you want to, have in training camp work out. Like we don't know what the starting lineup is. I see a number of y'all putting it out there. Someone says Dejounte Murray, Herb Jones, Ingram, Trey, and Zion. Like that's great, but there's no center there, and I don't think Zion can play the five. But you can close with that group. The other thing, and I did a show on this, was look, if Ingram's not fitting in around the team, you don't have to close games with him. There's enough talent here that you can trot out different five players. And it might be a tough pill to swallow. You probably want Ingram closing, but if he's not fitting in, you don't need to close with him. They benched him in that kind of comeback game against the Lakers, right as the end of the regular season was going on, the game that Zion got hurt. And they came back with him on the bench before Zion, had the hamstring injury. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind too. Ingram might be on the roster, but if he's not fitting in, there's enough talent here that you can change his role a little bit, I think. And that's something that is worth keeping in mind. Say It Ain't So says Zion, BI, Herb, Murray, and then a center. It's just like pick your center, and that's that here, I think. Ben Crabtree's been talking about this a lot in here, and that's good. This team is going to get dominated by big men on certain NBA teams, especially if they start and close with no big man. I mean, maybe, but it's also not like a big man-driven league. And let's go back to the Pelicans in that series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? Like, one of the things they didn't really do a ton of, and I agreed with this, was like play through Jonas Valanciunas. There was an advantage there. Chet Holmgren's a stick. Jonas JV could have just played bully ball with him, but you're not going to win tons of games if Jonas is going and scoring like 30 for you on any given night, given that he kind of plays a slower plotting style with his back to the basket. It's not going to generate 3-point looks and things like that for you. So you can play through those big men for a moment or two, a couple of possessions here and there, a stretch, but I don't think you can do that like for a whole game. So look at a team like Memphis compared to New Orleans. Say they're matching up Zach Edey, right? 7-2. Guys, NBA ready. And the Pelicans liked Edey a lot, but there was just no way they were going to be able to trade up and get him. They were hoping he was going to be there at 21. That wasn't going to be the case. And, if they want to just give the ball to Edey every single possession, like, it'll be okay. I would live with that. That means Ja Morant's not doing Ja Morant things, right? Like, that means some of their other guys aren't being the effective type of creators that they are. And while Edey's not going to shoot 100% at the basket, there are other big guys on this team that can kind of keep him away from there too, or make his life difficult. And I'm happy with them doing that sort of thing. Then they're not playing with pace. They're not playing with pace in the half court either, with passing and ball movement. That's what I want New Orleans to do. That's how they're going to become elite. It also then takes away the three-point shot. So let those teams do that. Like, that's okay. You play the Wizards and they got JV and they want to just get the ball to them every single time. New Orleans is going to outscore them, right? New Orleans will outscore teams that do that. So yeah, it's a concern that there might be a game or two they lose because of something like that. I don't think it's one of those things where it's like every center is going for 50 and New Orleans doesn't stand a chance. Their success is going to come down more to them and how they play offensively. The defense can be good. The defense can be good even without rim protection. They didn't have rim protection last year, and it was the sixth best defense. Like, they can be just fine on that side of the ball. It really comes down to what's it look like on the offensive end and how do you use that and who guards some of those centers. And if you get some of that, like, you'll be okay here. Nola Star Bar, by the way, go check them out. Will B.I. get a new contract before the season starts, or they keep options open to trade him still? I said on my show the other day, I think, a contract between 170, 175 for 4 years is a fair deal for him. It puts him at about 25% of the salary cap, which I think is good. And as the salary cap goes up 10% every year and he's only getting 8% raises, it's like kind of reverse inflation with certain things. And I think that can be really good. Oh, by the way, we just got some news while I'm recording the show here. So that's cool. We'll hit on that here in a second. So I don't think so. I don't think he'll agree to that. I think he wants to try, his luck next off season. But here's the thing, like, big name guys don't really move in free agency anymore. Paul George was a real big outlier this year. And that doesn't normally happen, right? And he easily should have, because the Clippers were dumb, should have re-signed with the Clippers. And then what does, the 76ers do? And there isn't an answer to that sort of thing. There's going to be maybe like 3-4 teams with cap space next summer. It's never a ton anymore. So he's not going to get paid in free agency either. And it's going to just limit his market. And I think that either means maybe he takes kind of like a team-ish friendly deal this offseason, or next summer just re-signs with them, because where else is he going to go? And I don't think that there's going to be like really, really great options there here. Todd Withrow says, I'm a diehard Pels fan, Jake. What happens with BI starting center spot? Go Pels, go Pels. We kind of touched on BI here. Starting center, I think, is going to be Daniel Tice as of now. Remains to be seen. Maybe they try and start small and go with Zion. I don't think they will. I think they'll play Tice, who, at 6'8", he plays bigger than he is. He's tougher, too, than you realize for someone of his stature. So that's a really great thing. Like, you don't want him to play 30 minutes per game, but can he give you 20? Like, maybe. Even if it's just kind of 15 minutes, 7 to start each half, that would be fine, too. So he's kind of who I expect there. Denzel Horton says everyday. If you're an everydayer, let me know, by the way, in the comments down below here. David Hutchinson says BI doesn't want to be a Tyus Jones. It's all about the market, not the player. I mean, exactly, right? Like, it's about what people are willing to pay you, right? Like, there's kind of the age-old, like, adage of, like, something is worth what someone's willing to pay for it, right? Like, that's kind of as simple as what it is. It doesn't really seem like there's a huge market for Ingram that could drive him back here in New Orleans. I even did a show, like, this is the type of thing where next summer, like, is he in line for a mid-level exception deal? We've seen that happen where these guys get really squeezed out and that's all that's left. That's not a great position to be in. Take the money here in New Orleans instead. He can be a really good player. He is a really good player. He needs to fit in better, and I would not pay him 35% of the salary cap. 20 to 25%? Yeah, absolutely. Like, he's definitely worth that here. Doug Rosenthal says, my pick for opening night starting 5, Murray, CJ, Zion, BI, and Tice. I think that makes sense. I think that's kind of like a tough pill to swallow for Herb Jones, who started the past couple of years, makes first team all defense this past season, and then, like, I don't know, it's like, gets benched. That's kind of weird. It's weird, right? It's tough to try and figure out. Nola G says Murray, Herb, Biz, and Tice. That, I think, makes some sense. You put CJ on the bench there, but I think you need CJ shooting out there. I think you need Trey shooting in there too. It's interesting. This is one I do want to actually kind of say and touch on here. Macadone says, Pelican stands won't say anything negative against the team because he's afraid of getting his media credentials pulled. You're better than that, Jake. They don't pull media credentials for being negative. That's not what they do. I'm negative all the time about them. I've said I will call them out. I've called them cheap. I've said all of these things. They don't literally do not like to be told, and when it's publicly put out there, that they are one of the only two teams that have never paid the luxury tax. I'm negative all the time. I have a whole show right after the season ended that says this season's a disappointment. They're not going to pull my credentials for being negative. They just want you to have solid analysis and be fair about the coverage, right? So if they do good, say good things. Don't just only be negative to be negative. I'm negative when I need to be. I'm also positive because that's just kind of who I am. It has nothing to do with the credential. They could take away my credential. Nothing about this show will change. I promise you that. But they're not going to. I am critical, but I'm not going to just be pessimistic to be hot takey. Right? That doesn't do any good. Here's the other thing. And if you want to get into this industry, and look, I have a lot of people who reach out. I have coffee with people in New Orleans when it comes to that sort of thing, right? Like asking for advice on all of this. If I tell you this team sucks, right? If I tell you this team sucks, why would you listen to my show the next day? Right? If I tell you they're never going to be good unless Gail Benson sells the team, why would you listen? You're not going to. There's no point in anything like that. I'll take the reality of a situation and we will look for positives in it. Why would you have listened to Locked On Pistons at all last year when they had that losing streak, right? Except his show did insane numbers because he was finding things that were interesting about those games and how they could apply those lessons to avoid another losing streak like that. There's ways to get into criticism of the team without just being negative to be negative to say you're that guy. Anyway, we're going to move on from that one because no, I'm not. They're not going to take away my credential for being negative. If they're bad, they will. Trust me, I will do it. I said I didn't like the Yves Missi pick. I'm going to have my credential next season, no problem, right? Still don't love that pick. There were other guys I would have taken. They didn't. It's fine. So let's move on to a couple of other things here. This one's good. Dan Conley, has the team had any serious discussions about trading CJ after the Ingram market turned out to be virtually non-existent? Yeah, look, one of the things that I don't think people just get how a front office operates. They have like binders of things, and I've seen these binders, right? That has expected values for players. It has trade ideas, future contracts for players, right? If we trade for this guy, what would his next contract look like based off of the trajectory? What are the projections we think this guy could be? They have internal discussions. It's like 10 people in the front office, and it's like, everyone come in with a trade idea today, and let's talk about them and see if those moves make sense and how it would improve the team, right? Like, they do this every day. So yeah, they've had discussions, at least internally, about trading CJ. They've had discussions about trading literally every player on this team internally, because that's what every team does. Every team has had internal discussions about all of their players and trading them. I don't know if it's anything serious just yet. I'd be willing to bet that, if someone were to be moved this offseason, depending on the role that CJ has, that you could easily see that being the case. But here's the thing, right? Like, this team needs to shoot more threes, right? We want that. They took, what was the number last year? Let me pull it up. 32.6 three-point attempts last season per game. It's 24th in the league. Who led the team in three-point attempts per game? CJ McCollum at 8.4. He shot 43% from three. That's an insanely good number. He was making 3.6. Over 3.5 made threes per game, right? That's a really good number. I don't know if you can move that guy. You need that shooting around Zion. You might need that shooting in the starting lineup around Zion, right? Like, that's one of the things that I think to keep in mind when it comes to CJ. You have Trey, yeah, but can you imagine a lineup of Trey, CJ around Zion with maybe Murray and Herb as like a closing group, something like that, right? Like, Murray can shoot the three. We know that. Not like elite at it, but he can do it. Herb is great in the corner last year, even if teams don't respect it, but I think that'll change. Something worth keeping in mind, right? CJ can handle the ball a little bit too. Trey doesn't do that, but Trey's been a better rebounder. There's some size there. Those are all those sorts of things, I think, that are worth kind of like keeping in mind when it comes to all of it. So that's worth, keeping in mind when it comes to like a potential trade with all of that here. So let's keep going through your questions here. Oh boy, I skipped ahead and now I'm like, wait, should I have done that? Is that what I wanted to do here? Mimicking the government here says, I don't think the situation is as bad as some people are making it out to be. With the center spot, no, I agree with that. I don't think it's as bad. It's not good, but I think you can kind of see other things work. Charles Pierre says, we've seen BI play the 5 at times. Can you see a closing lineup with Murray, Zion, BI, Trey, CJ? Yeah, it's not BI at the 5. It's Zion at the 5. And it's just you're looking for someone to defend 5s. That would more likely be Trey. I don't know when we've really seen Brandon Ingram play the center spot here. I'm trying to see if he's like ever really done that. Not really. He for the most part here in New Orleans, right? He's played the majority of his time as a 2 or a 3 versus a 4. So I don't really see that kind of being the guy to do that. But I think it could be Trey or Zion just defending that, and that's like just gonna be what it's gonna kind of be here when it comes to all of that. Mac Doan says here, what does the team look like with BI returning and trying to play hero ball to get the next contract? It stifles Zion and Trey's development. I agree. You just bench him. Like, you don't play him. If he's going to do that, you just won't play him. We've seen Willie Green do that, right? The end of the regular season against the Los Angeles Lakers, BI was benched down the stretch in that like comeback attempt, right? Like, they were just like, no, absolutely not. Like, this is not how we're going to do it. And that was fine. It worked. That was okay. So you can take him out of the game. Like, I think it's totally fine. Like, that's probably what it's going to be here. Charles Pierre says, Herb is great all-around player, but in the clutch situations, we've seen Herb miss key shots. I love Herb, but I don't have his clutch numbers in front of me. I could probably pull those and see. I mean, everyone misses clutch shots. Everyone for the Pelicans has missed clutch shots. They have not been a good clutch team. That's part of why they brought in Dejounte Murray, because he's at least done that a lot and was one of the top 5 leading scorers in clutch minutes last year. At least you have a guy that can do that. I think also it's one of those things where they brought him in to organize the offense too, to at least just generate some sets, run a pick and roll down the stretch of a game where they didn't have anyone that was really capable of looking at all of that. So I think adding Murray to the team here in that regard is actually like a pretty big deal. And I think that will help them when it comes to clutch situations, right? They were 14 and 15 in clutch games last year. You swing that by like 5, right? So they would be 19 and 11. That puts you as a top 4 seed. Now, even 3 wins would have done that, right? So that is, I think, an area that they can really improve. That's also going to be on Willie Green to help them improve with all of that too, right? Because they didn't do a good job with that last year, and they need to make some coaching adjustments and some, improvements in that area as well. But you can definitely win more close games than you won last year, and 3 wins would have put them as the 4th seed last year by a game. Like, I do think that's like definitely capable for this team, right? So I think that's going to be hopefully an area that they can make like improvements in right away. And look, they weren't closing with Jonas Valanciunas. They were closing with Larry Nance Jr. Maybe you just try Zion at the 5 there, and that'll kind of do some of that, right? The small ball center. So I think that is a situation that could be an area that they can improve on. Carlos Zelaya says Herb cannot come off the bench. I agree, but it depends if you just want more offense or defense. Like, in general, I think it's tough to see Herb coming in off of the bench. His big effectiveness on defense is going to be, with like shutting guys down, right? You don't want him coming in off the bench and playing against second units. You want him shutting down starters, and he can do that. I think, a guy like Murray, who I'm expecting to have a good defensive season, can do some of that role too. And, maybe then it means you can skew a little bit more offensive at Herb's position. So could you start Trey over Herb because you have Murray there? I think that is something that, could happen a little bit here. So that's an option, right? We don't know what the starting lineup is. Like, I truly don't know what it's going to be yet. I think we'll get an idea, obviously in the first preseason game. We'll get an idea during training camp too. It's going to be tough to kind of figure all of that out, but that's going to be an interesting decision, and we'll see what they end up happening with, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy. Do you start CJ? Like, All of those things are kind of up in the air right now. Khalil Ware would have been such a great pick. Yeah, but he went before him, right? There were other guys you could have taken too. Deron Holmes II, clearly had a promise from Denver to the point where they traded up to get him. He was available at 21. I would have loved him. He had an unfortunate injury during Summer League. He's going to, I think, miss all of this season, right? If that's going to end up being the case. Jim Clemmer says we need to give Trey enough playing time to become the player he needs to be. How's that going to happen? He's going to play 30 plus minutes per game. Whether he's starting or coming off the bench, he's going to be playing 30 plus minutes per game. And you have to imagine he's going to be in closing lineups. His size is good. The 3-point shooting is so important too. He's someone that no matter whether he's starting or coming off the bench, and he wants to start, I think is going to have a very, very big role for this team. He needs to add things to his game. He needs to add the off the dribble game, right? Like when teams close out on him pretty hard from three, he doesn't have the best handle to drive and attack the basket. And then usually if someone rotates over and gets in his way, he really struggles, right? Whether it's he just can't process it that fast or doesn't have the moves to get around some of those guys and has to just try dunking over them isn't always the thing. Whether he adds a little pull-up jumper, which you started to see, by the way, last year from him, he's been improving. Just keep improving. And if he does that, he can be really, really good, in a variety of roles last year. And he got better as the season went on at rebounding. So you can see the growth from him. And I think we're going to get in, a big, big season for him. I'm going to be on our Locked On Fantasy Basketball show in like a week or two. And it was like, who's your breakout player? And I said it was going to be Trey Murphy. So that's who I kind of put in there for all of that. So I'm expecting big things from Trey this offseason and this coming season. And so I think that's going to be, they want him to start. They want to try and find a starting role for him. I don't know how you figure it out, right? Again, you have Zion could start, BI could start, CJ could start, Murray could start, Herb Jones could start, Trey could start. There's like 6, 7, 8 guys that I think could make a claim for a starting spot. And that's before we even get into like the center position where it feels like there's going to be a center that starts. So these are still all open questions. In one sense, yes, there are more questions than answers because we don't know who the starting lineup is going to be. And that's a big question, but that'll get answered very soon. And then you have the answer for that sort of thing. So I do think the team is better than they were a year ago. I do think they can potentially, I'm not saying they will, fight for a top 4 spot, home court advantage in the first round. That would be really cool. But we'll find out, right? Doug Rosenthal says, sounds like the $1 million question is CJ or Herb as a starter or Trey, right? Like those are all big questions here and we don't know yet. And it'll be on Willie Green to figure that out. Like this is we haven't talked about it probably enough on the show and I'll dedicate some time this coming week to it. But this is a big like Herb Jones week, right? Or Herb Jones week. This is a big Willie Green season, like a prove it year in a sense from Willie Green. I don't think he's on the hot seat. I think if the season goes real south, he will be, if it's not injuries and things like that, but he's got to step up and improve too, right? It's not just players. Coaches have growth as well. And Willie Green, I think we'll have the opportunity to show us or not show us that. We'll talk about that. That's a great point that kind of came to me doing all of this. That we'll talk about this coming week, a lot of like what Willie Green needs to improve upon, what we want to see him like working on in training camp and preseason and all of those things. So I think the chat's slowing down here a little bit. So let's wrap it up here. We've gone for about 45 minutes or so. Live episode of Locked On Pelicans. We're just kind of doing your questions and everything. So this was a lot of fun. Show will be 3 days a week next week. I don't know if it'll be Monday, Wednesday, Friday yet. Or if we'll do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday again, but it'll be 3 days a week. We're going to do that through like mid-September, so about another month or so. Then we ramp it back up to 5 days a week, get you set for training camp, start of the regular season, media day, all of those things. It's going to be a lot of fun. So please subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, wherever you get your podcast. We are on YouTube as well. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I appreciate y'all being here on the live show with me. See y'all next time.